maybe I'll grab a seat for a little bit. Yeah. Yep.
I'll introduce you.
Yep. Perfect.
Good evening. Thank you everyone so much for coming out on a rainy evening. I know it's hard for people to drag themselves out of home when it's nice and warm. We're starting to wrap up Welcome Week, and we have an exciting event here tonight. Our last lecture, it's our second last lecture, and we'll host another one in the fall. Student Life this past fall set out boxes across campus and asked students to vote on who they would like to hear a last lecture from. So it is my pleasure to bring up the individual who received the most votes, and that is Garrett Peltonen, an assistant professor of kinesiology.
Well, thank you for having me, and again, thank you for braving the elements. As mentioned, my name is Garrett, and I'm part of the School of Nursing and Kinesiology. I'm the kinesiology part. Is that a little better? All right. I'm the kinesiology part, and so if any of you guys are interested, I got to put a little plug for kinesiology. Are interested in exercise physiology, sports, athletics, come over and check out our department. It's pretty good. So anyway, if this was actually my last lecture, I'd probably cancel class and maybe I'll buy you a beer or some beverage. But being that it's not our last lecture, the simulated last lecture, I have a little outline of what I'm going to cover tonight. So it took me a while to think of what I'm actually going to talk about here. And I figured I had a little bit of a unique path, I would say, to get where I am. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my path of how I got to Silver City and specifically Western New Mexico University. And then I'll talk about some of the adventures or more misadventures along the way. So hopefully the students out there, you can learn maybe from some of my choices, whether they be good or bad choices. And then I'm going to talk about what I sort of have summarized in my mind to be important aspects of life, development, etc. And I call these the 3 E's. And we're going to talk about education, exercise, and experiences. So that's sort of the general outline of what we are going to cover. So where am I from? Well, I'm from a small town in northern Wisconsin. It's similar to Silver City. Do we have a Wisconsinite? No, I guess. All right. Okay, yeah, so you may have noticed I have a little bit of an accent, so because I'm from northern Wisconsin, right on Lake Superior, and if you were to drive a car, it takes about 26 hours to get up there to northern Wisconsin, so it's quite a ways away. And if anyone has any questions as we're going through, feel free to raise your hand and let me know. I like a little bit of back and forth, so interactive talk. So the town where I grew up, it's a nice place, right? You're on Lake Superior, so we have the lake right there. In the fall, you have some beautiful fall colors. It's sort of like Silver City, there's a National Scenic Trail. We don't have the Continental Divide Trail, but it is the North Country National Scenic Trail. So it's a nice place to grow up. However, for 9 months out of the year, it is winter. So this is actually a picture from my parents' front yard. Snow is on the ground for, like I said, 8-9 months out of the year. If you look at the thermometer here, what temperature do you guys see? It's about negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So when it starts getting that cold, you can do stuff like you can take a hot cup of coffee and you can throw it in the air and it'll freeze before it hits the ground. So every year we get these cold snaps. There's snow in the downtown and people spend endless amounts of hours sitting on the ice fishing. So these are ice fishing individuals. If you do happen to be up there in the middle of the winter, it is pretty nice. There's the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, and they have what are these ice caves. So they're great ice cave formations. But down here, I actually just, over a winter break, came back from Carlsbad Caverns, which are actually, I think, more impressive because they take much longer to form. But there are these ice caves, so it's not all doom and gloom in the winter. So after I graduated high school, I wanted to go someplace warm, right? I didn't actually believe that you could wear shorts in the middle of January. I've never seen the ocean, so I decided to hit the road, and I ended up at the University of Arizona in Tucson. So that's only, 3 hours away from here or so? And my brother had lived there at the time, and I loved going to school there. But before I get into my undergrad summary, I like to use this little cartoon to summarize my undergrad. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Tommy Boy before, but it says a lot of people go to college for 7 years, and it's like, yeah, I know, they're called doctors. It actually took me 10 years to do my undergraduate degree. So I'll sort of explain as we go through that. So while I was at the University of Arizona, I worked at some, this Beyond Bread, I think it's still there in Tucson, Wild Oats. I worked in the deli. And as a college student, it's kind of key to work at some of these food type places, right? Because you can supplement your diet with a lot of the free food that they offer you when you work at these places. And there I also started riding bicycle. I joined the cycling club at University of Arizona. So after a few years at school there, I decided to stop school because I could no longer afford it, and I was going to work and gain in-state tuition. But being broke out of college, I decided to move back to Wisconsin. And when I moved back to Wisconsin, I enrolled at the University of Wisconsin-Madison because it was more affordable. And I always say going to the University of Arizona was the worst, best decision I have ever made because I'll probably be paying off the student loans that I accumulated from there for the rest of my life. But I got a lot of great, valuable experiences. So back in Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I was still unsure of what I actually wanted to study. And so I took a variety of classes, but I took this plant physiology class with this professor named Edgar Spalding. And it was one of the best classes I'd ever taken. His passion for exercise or for plant physiology was impressive. And so he got me interested in physiology, and I was like, maybe I'll go into botany or some botany science related field. But in the meantime, I joined the University of Wisconsin Collegiate Cycling Club, and we did really well. We ended up actually winning a national championship in 2 events, the criterium and the team time trial. So my studies sort of got put on a hold a little bit because in addition to the collegiate team, I ended up becoming a professional cyclist. And I'd also like to point out that being that this collegiate cycling was such a large impact on my life, working on starting a collegiate cycling club here at WNMU. So if anyone's interested in cycling at any level, feel free to ask me, and hopefully sometime in the future we'll have a club. So that was sort of my launching point. I got into professional cycling due to my experience at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And because of the demands of cycling, you race from January through October. I could no longer go to school, so I ended up quitting school. It was one of my passions to race bicycle professionally. And if I got to travel all over the world, so if you notice this picture right here, right? We're riding on the wrong side of the road, aren't we? Yeah, because that's where we were in Australia, got to go to Taiwan. You name it, we raced all over the world, a variety of different teams, and it was a blast. I enjoyed that experience. And being a cyclist, right, because I was at Wisconsin at the time, and I feel that everybody at some point should probably live in California for the experience, especially if you're from a rural town in northern Wisconsin, right? And so I was going to move to California and thinking you'll have great weather, there's beaches, etc. And I ended up moving to Folsom, California, because you're sort of at the base of the Sierra Nevada mountains and you could train in the hills. However, when I moved there, it was the wettest winter I think they've had in a long time. So we were either riding in the pouring rain, or else you'd go up in the mountains and it would be snow and ice. So it was a rather terrible experience. And what's the saying that they always say, that if you don't like your situation, change it, right? Or if you can change your situation, go ahead and change it. So after dealing with that for a handful of months, packed bags and moved to Boulder, Colorado. So it sounds kind of funny to move to Colorado for nicer weather, but it was a lot nicer and more sunny in Colorado. And then life, right? Life's about choices. We make choices as we go through life, and we have some good choices and we have some bad choices. And so as a 20-year-old male, after the cycling season, I was actually out recreationally riding mountain bike with a buddy of mine, and he challenged me to take this big jump. So I took this jump, and I did not land the jump, and I ended up breaking my back in 3 different places. And that was sort of the end of my cycling career. And that's a good sort of lesson to teach, especially males out there. If you look at some of the statistics, 20-year-old males are the most likely individuals to have spinal cord type injuries. You have really old population, but then you also have the younger male population. So I fit right into that demographic. And so it's not a funny story, but right, so once you have an injury like that, you get people sort of help you out initially to get over the hump, but after a week or so, people sort of forget about you, and you still can't move that well, but I could manage to ride my bike. I had this mountain bike, so I had the handlebars where you could still sort of ride your bike, and one day, the guy who I was living with, a teammate of mine, he was at work, and I was like, man, I'm just gonna go for a little bike ride, because I was going stir crazy, sitting in the house not doing anything. And so it comes again to our choices, right? Choices that we make. So I went out for a little bike ride, and it was kind of a drizzly, cloudy day, and I just remember I couldn't really turn my head, right? So when you come to stop signs, you had to sort of stop and like move your lower body. And I just remember this green blob coming at me, and next thing I knew, I woke up in the middle of the street. I got hit by a car when I had a broken back. And it's not funny, but it's kind of funny, because when I woke up in the street and the ambulance came, they got me in the ambulance, and all the paramedics were like, who put this back brace on you? And I was like, well, I had it when I left the house. So, but nothing serious happened as regards of that, and so that sort of put an end to my cycling career. And I was in Boulder at the time, and I was sort of like, well, what next? And I'm sure like a lot of students here, especially at Western, I was a first-generation college student, and I wanted to make it a priority to finish my undergraduate degree. Even though it was taking me so long, it was still important for me to finish my degree. So I enrolled at the University of Colorado, and because of my degree in because of my previous class at Madison in botany or plant physiology, I was interested in physiology, and I had a background in cycling, I wanted to learn more about how the body worked. So I ended up going after the degree of integrative physiology at University of Colorado Boulder. And at this time, because I was no longer cycling, I still needed some way to have some sort of adventure or experience in my life, right? Because after you did that for 5, 6, 7 years where I was racing bike, you couldn't just stop and focus solely on school. So I got involved in the ultra endurance world. And so I was in Colorado at the time, and this was back in the mid-late 2000s. There was a race called the Leadville Trail 100. And so it starts in Leadville, Colorado, which is at about 10,000 feet, and it goes over some big passes up to almost 13,000 feet a couple times, and back to Leadville, and it's 100 miles long. And I was like, I should register for this and give it a try, see if I can do it, right? 100 miles can't be that hard, right? And it was really hard. But I was able to finish, but I ended up with a broken foot at the end of the race. And I was like, I swore to myself, I was like, I'll never do this again. But now what, we're over a decade later, and I'm still dabbling into some of these events. And we'll come back to this a little bit later. So after 10 years of searching for my undergraduate degree, I finally was given a degree, and I got my degree in integrative physiology from CU Boulder. So like a lot of individuals who graduate, you sort of think, well, what am I going to do next? And I was sort of unsure. So I applied to a couple of graduate schools. I was like, maybe I'll go to graduate school. Maybe I'll become a coach like a lot of other previous cyclists did. And I got a call back from Colorado State University. And they were like, hey, why don't you come up and go to graduate school here? And I was offered a research assistantship. So I think that's really neat about graduate school, especially in the fields of kinesiology or some other fields, is that you can actually get paid to go to school. And that's pretty neat. So I got my tuition covered, and they paid for me to go to school and do some research. And who I did research with, I had a mentor up there named Christopher Bell. He still works up there, and he is a guy from England, so he's English. And so when he was not in the pub, we were out doing some rather cool scientific research. And it was sort of my first exposure to research. We got to take some of our subjects, we got to expose them to low oxygen air, sort of simulate high altitude, and see how they respond to it. We got to infuse all kind of cool drugs into them. So we got to do a lot of neat type invasive research. We also looked at how sprint interval training affects the body, and specifically the muscles. So we would take muscle biopsies. So basically you shove a probe in people's leg and you take some muscle, and then you have them sprint interval train, and then you do it again at the end, and you can see how the muscle's adapting to exercise. So you got to do a lot of cool, invasive type research. And so my master's degrees are only about 2 years, and the time goes by really quick. And so at the end of that 2 years, I wrote my thesis, and instead of going to graduation, I treated myself to this bicycle ride called the Tour Divide. And if anyone's familiar with Tour Divide, right? So the Continental Divide goes right through our backyard here. And this is a self-supported bicycle event. It starts up in Banff, Alberta in Canada, and you basically follow the Continental Divide all the way down, and it comes right here, right through Silver City, and it finishes at Antelope Wells, which is, 100 miles south of town here. And the whole route is almost 3,000 miles. It's about 2,745 miles, and you got to carry all of your gear, etc. It's really unique. So in the summer, probably in the mid to end of June, you may see some cyclists coming through town, and they're most likely doing this Tour Divide event. So it's pretty neat to have that in our backyard. So here is the start in Banff, Alberta. At of the race, and here was me at the finish, just at Antelope Wells, just down the road. And it was really cold throughout the entire race. So the best night of sleep I actually had was up in Wyoming, where I slept in one of these Forest Service crappers or bathrooms, right? So that was the best night of sleep I had the whole way. And I always like to use that as an example because, right, you need to make the best of your situation. That was a good experience or event that I had. So I finished that bicycle ride, and if any of you ever in the future do any of these big adventures, when you finish them, you're sort of like, you accomplish this goal, then you're like, what do you do next? And my mentor from Colorado State said, you should continue going on to more school. You should consider getting a PhD. And so if any of you are not familiar with how that works, I didn't know until I actually did it, and I'm sure most of us are in the same boat. But what my mentor told me was just go online and search around for programs that you're interested in, and then look at the researchers and see if they have any money that can actually fund a graduate student. So I did a bunch of research, and I contacted this guy named William Schrage at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he had a bunch of money, he just got a grant, and he looked at vascular physiology, which I was interested in, and he's like, why don't you come to Madison and you can work with me and do your PhD. And he's not an Englishman, but he's from Wisconsin. So similarly, if he was not at the pub, he would be doing good scientific research. And so what did we study in that lab? Well, we studied how blood flow is regulated to active muscle, right? When you start exercising, you increase blood flow. We also studied blood flow to areas like the brain, and how we get blood flow to the brain. Because if you don't get blood flow to the brain, right, you pass out, and you can actually die. So these were some cool studies as well. We got to put basically these catheters in people's arteries, infuse drugs, see how their blood responded to that. We stuffed people in these MRI machines to get these beautiful images of the cerebral vasculature. And again, you always got to infuse some sort of drugs, right, to see how their vasculature responds. And along the way, you do a lot of academic stuff, right? You write some papers, you get to go to these cool conferences. And especially in Wisconsin, it was nice to go to San Diego in April, right? So it was nice to be able to go to these conferences and present some of your work. Well, in graduate school, right, you spend a lot of time in the lab doing research, writing papers, etc. But don't be scared if any of you want to go to graduate school, because you can have a lot of fun adventures as well. So my partner, or my wife now at the time, we lived in this little hole-in-the-wall apartment. I think it was the cheapest place in Madison, Wisconsin at the time. I remember you could see the outside through the window, so we had to plug it with things so cold air wouldn't come in. And we'd save our money and we'd take adventures. So we went to places like I was able to run around and hike around the Alps. Here's the Alps in France, the Italian Alps. In Italy, you got to eat pizza, which was delicious. And I actually went to Rome, and I was excited because I was going to eat a big plate of pasta in Rome. I went to this Italian restaurant in Rome, and they told me they ran out of pasta. I thought that was so funny. It's like New Mexico running out of green chili, right? It just doesn't happen. But anyway, I ate pizza instead. Got to drink beer in Germany. Along the way, we ended up getting married. We had a little baby. We saw some huge waterfalls in Mexico. We got to backpack the Copper Canyon, go to some nice beaches, check out Utah, etc. So you have a lot of fun adventures along the way while you're going to graduate school. So 5 years of graduate school went by pretty quick. You ended up doing all the work necessary. And my wife sort of followed me where I went a lot of places. And so we had a quick tour of New England because she had a job out there. So we briefly stayed in New England. And while she worked, my little daughter, my adventure buddy, we just sort of climbed mountains and explored the area. And in the meantime, I was looking for jobs, right? And we sort of wanted to go to a smaller area. And I noticed that there was a job open here in Silver City. So I applied to it and ended up getting hired. And so we made the journey from Vermont down here to Silver City, which is a lot longer than 26 hours from Wisconsin. I think it's 37 hours, it says up there. And we love it here. We like to do adventures as well. We since had a second little baby. We like to go and utilize the Gila National Forest. So for you individuals that are here, just north of town, we have 3.3 million acres of national forest land. There's some a little bit south of town as well, but it's predominantly north of town. And there are so many trails and overviews and things to see. It's a great place to live and call home and actually go to college. So from all of these experiences, and when you sort of go back and look at it, you know, as you go along, your life sort of changes. And at one time I was like, we're never gonna just keep on moving all over the place, but it's nice to actually find a place to call home. And so what have I learned over the years that maybe I can provide some from information to you guys? Well, no, it's a joke. This one's a joke slide. So it's kind of the opposite of what I believe. So if something's too hard to do, then it's not worth doing. No, it's not the case. What I think is very important, and I'm going to try to pass on to you, are the 3 E's of education, exercise, and experience. I'm going to sort of walk you through why I think that these are important. Before I go on, do I have any questions first? Any questions? No? Yeah. So if we look at education, I'm sort of preaching to the so-called choir here, right? Because we're all invested in education. We're either in college, we teach at college, we support Western University here, which is a great place to go to school, by the way. So when we look at education, if you look at all the data out there, generally individuals with a college education are happier, healthier, and enjoying a higher quality of life than those without a college education. So if you look at some of the benefits of education, obviously it prepares you for your career, right? Whatever your career wants to be, it prepares you for that. There's economic benefits. Personally, you make more money. I'll show you some data on this. And the society itself benefits economically from you having a greater education. People who are educated tend to make better health choices. They're more likely to exercise, and they're more likely to avoid poor health behaviors. And I'll show you some data on this. Greater civic involvement. And what is meant by civic involvement? Well, you're more likely to volunteer, more likely to vote. All that are important things. And you also have personal development. So greater critical thinking skills. And I'm going to touch on this a little bit, why I think these critical thinking skills are so important. You're able to better communicate your thoughts and ideas. You can identify what your personal skills are, what are you good at, and how you can utilize those skills. You can realize what you're actually passionate about. So when I was in Madison, I took that botany class, and I was like, wow, I'm interested in physiology. I ended up going into human physiology, but it made me realize I was interested in physiology. You have a greater sense of self-discipline. You get to class on time, you finish your work, etc. And at the end of the day, you have a sense of accomplishment, right? How do you guys feel when you hand in that paper at the end of the semester and you get to go on break? You sort of feel that sense of accomplishment, right? And when you graduate, you get that sense of accomplishment. So education is very important from those aspects. So you didn't think I was going to let you get away without any graphs, right? So we got to have some graphs. So if we look at some of the economic benefits of education, and so here is basically, if we look on the y-axis over here, we have lower education level up to higher education levels. And what you see is that salaries increase with the more education that you get. If you look at unemployment over here, what we see is that the highest unemployment tends to be with the lowest educated individuals, whereas bachelor's degree or higher, you have the lowest level of unemployment. So not only do you have a job, but you make more money. And then people often say, but what about even me, right? Because I went to University of Arizona, I have all these student loans. Well, despite the investment and cost of going to college, right, in the long run, your own earning potential pays that cost off of going to college. And what's great in New Mexico, right, education is very affordable, and they're actually talking about making it free tuition next year for students. If we look at the health choices, so if we look over here at leisure time aerobic activity, so we have the lower amount of education up to bachelor's degree, we see that there's more physical activity the more educated individuals are. We see that smoking rates are much lower in individuals with greater education, and that's very important for health, right? If we look at obesity levels, if you look at you have a bachelor's degree or higher, you have much lower level of obesity regardless of you're a man or a woman. And what's really interesting, and it makes sense, is that kids of individuals who went to college, or if your parents went to college, as a kid, you're much less likely to be obese compared to those who have less education. So you have better health choices. And I also mentioned the civic involvement. So if you look up here, we look at volunteer hours, and what you can see is that both males and females, if you have greater levels of education, you're more likely to volunteer, which benefits communities and society as a whole. And you're also more likely to vote, which is very, very important. So education has a variety of these benefits. And I think this day and age, with this fake news out there, education is extremely important because it improves your critical thinking skills. It allows you to tell fact versus fiction. And there's this Yale University professor named Tim Snyder who has this nice quote that says, "Believe in truth. To abandon facts is to abandon freedom. If nothing is true, then all is spectacle." So when you are educated, we can actually sort of sort out the fact from the fiction. And I think that's very important, especially in today's society. So education has a variety of benefits. And then I may be biased because I'm a kinesiologist, right? But I always tell my students, almost in all my classes, I think that exercise will fix almost everything. You can't say everything, right? You always got to have that almost everything. And why do I think that is the case? Well, if we look at some data that is out there, physical fitness is the single best predictor of mortality. So how fit you are is the single best predictor of mortality. And what is really cool is that if you haven't exercised your entire life and you're, 60, 70, 80 years old, older adults can maintain their ability to respond to this exercise training well into older age. So you can start exercising as an older individual, improve your fitness, and increase your longevity. And here's some nice graphs just demonstrating. If we look over here, we can see that both men and women, that as mortality declines, as you have a higher level of physical fitness. And additionally, this is another interesting graph, right? We put all this money into stopping smoking, and that's very important for health outcomes, right? But if we look at attributable fractions of all-cause deaths in this longitudinal study, what they showed is that if you look at obesity, smoking, hypertension, cholesterol, diabetes, the most important factor is our physical fitness right there, or cardiorespiratory fitness. So if we can improve our fitness, we can improve longevity of life. But is longevity of life always the best thing? Right? If you just live long and you're miserable and not happy, right? That's not always a good thing as well, right? And what's great about exercise, right? So a lot of the general population that doesn't exercise, right? We age, we have our maximum level of functioning, and then you gradually get a chronic disease, your functioning goes down, you keep going down, and then you slowly have this decline. What we want to do is you want to live at a very high functioning level all the way until about the day that you die, and then all of a sudden you have this really fast, rapid decline. And one of the best predictors for this successful aging type graph is a physically active and mentally stimulating lifestyle. So not only does exercise increase the length of life, but it'll improve the quality of life. And I like this quote from Abraham Lincoln, right? In the end, it's not the years in your life, it is a life in your years that actually matter. But exercise will actually give you both, right? More life and length of your years. So why does exercise increase longevity and quality of life? Well, I just went through, and there's a lot more data out there, but I just picked some of the important points. So this isn't everyone, but we already talked about it decreases mortality, decreases risk of obesity, improves lipid profiles, improves blood pressure, decreases risk of chronic disease, which includes cardiovascular disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, and dementia. It can actually slow those diseases in the development. Some cancers, specifically these 7 cancers that are listed right there, we have lung disease, stroke, and kidney disease. It's the only thing that's known to grow brain mass. Exercise. It increases the volume of our hippocampus, and thus it improves cognitive function, increases our memory, improves performance in school. So I always tell my students, right? So what's neat about exercise is if you exercise before you go to class or you study, you're more likely to pay attention in class, right? And then if you exercise after you study or are in class, you're more likely to retain those memories. So I'm always like, you should exercise before and after class and just tell everyone that you're studying, right? It's a good way to do. And I always hear people talking about doing these overnighters and studying, and I don't think that's the best way to go about it. I think you should put in your time and then get some exercise, get a good night's sleep, and you'll retain a lot more of the knowledge that you have. One of the worst things you can actually do is drink alcohol after you do any sort of studying, even a beer or two, because it slows the ability of your brain to retain those memories. So exercise when you're studying. Don't have a beer or anything while you're studying. To go on for a few more, it improves bone mineral density, slows the loss of muscle mass with age or sarcopenia, maximizes psychological health, improves confidence and self-esteem, decreases anxiety and depression, increases energy levels, improves functional ability, and ultimately all of these, it improves quality of life. So if we look at it as a whole, and the American College of Sports Medicine has adopted this slogan, exercise is medicine. And we need to start treating exercise as medicine. And this is probably one of my favorite cartoons of all time. I have it on the door of my office. So if we look at it here, it says, to prevent a heart attack, we have a doctor here, take 1 aspirin every day, take it out for a run, then take it to the gym, and then take it for a bike ride. So I think we can learn a lot from that single cartoon. And so what are actually the recommendations for exercise? What do we recommend for exercise? Well, the current recommendations are at least 150 minutes to 300 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week. And moderate intensity is something like walking, 150 minutes of walking a week. So that's 30 minutes of walking 5 days a week. It's pretty feasible. The more exercise you do, the better. 300 minutes is better than 150. If you can do more than 300 minutes, that's even better. There's really no upper limit to the amount of exercise that can be beneficial to health. If you don't really like to do this moderate intensity exercise, you can do 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise per week. So that's stuff like running, hiking hard uphill, things like that. And recently, this idea of high intensity interval training has become very popular, where you do sprints and whatnot. Additionally, it's important to do resistance training involving all major muscle groups about 2 times a week. So that's the exercise recommendations. And if you can't meet this 150 minutes a week, something is better than nothing. So even little bits of exercise can be beneficial to health. As simple as standing up every once in a while has benefits to health. So just minimal amounts of exercise can be health. So if exercise is so good, right, it's sort of this almost, I feel like, miracle panacea that could solve a lot of our problems, why is it that so few people actually exercise? If we look at some of the statistics, as of 2018, the CDC says that 24% of all adults meet the current exercise recommendations, so 1 out of 4. Whereas another 25%, and I find this statistic alarming, engage in no leisure time physical activity. So try to have almost no activity. It's very difficult to do, right? To park at even McDonald's and walk in is a little bit of physical activity, right? You're driving through the drive-through, things like that. So it's something, I think, as a society, and you individuals, you young individuals, are the ones who are going to come up with solutions to these problems. I think exercise is a good way to go to focus on some of these issues. So I think you, your friends, etc., should all try to prioritize a physically active lifestyle, right? The gym is great if you want to work out in the gym is great, any type of activity. But some people, they don't really like running on a treadmill, it gets boring, etc. In our backyard, we have so many trails. We have Boston Hill right next to campus here that has lots of trails. We have the Continental Divide National Scenic Trail, which travels almost 3,000 miles north and south that we can go and hike on. And if we look at some of these famous older individuals, Henry David Thoreau, he has this quote. He said, "I think that I cannot preserve my health and spirits unless I spend 4 hours a day at least, and it is commonly more than that, sauntering through the woods and over the hills and fields, absolutely free from all worldly engagements." So it's a very important aspect of our life to get physical activity. And if you don't like purposely going and working out, there's lots of other ways to get physical activity in your life as well. And there's this guy from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, an exercise psychologist named Bill Morgan, who came up with this idea called exercise with a purpose, or factor P. And it's stuff like, instead of walk, drive to work or school, right? Because you're having a purpose. You're walking to work. You're walking to school. Park in parking spaces further away. So if you go to Walmart out here, right, and do a little shopping, what do you notice? People sort of drive around up and down the lanes trying to find the closest spaces possible. And what do you notice in this picture? Where are most people parking? Trying to park as close to the door as possible. You should maybe park where this individual's parking and then walk into the store and walk around. And additionally, right, no one will open the door and put dings in your car, so that's another benefit. Do things like take the stairs instead of the escalator or elevator. So what do you notice a lot of times in places, right? Everyone's in a line waiting to go up the escalator when there's one, maybe no one on the stairs. So do your health a favor and go up the stairs. And so the last factor that I think is kind of important is to have experiences. And your education, your exercise can all be wrapped into these experiences. Because at the end of the day, that's all you really have are your experiences, right? You can have lots of stuff, but does that really matter, right? You want to remember the stories, the times you spent with your kids, the travels you have taken. So I think I put up some of my quotes that I like up here, and that you should get out and travel. Go to places that you want to go. Save up money. Go travel in your free time, because life is kind of short, right? And we need to have experiences. And when you go travel places, you realize other cultures. You eat different food. It's a great way to see the world. You can go like I did. I went to the Alps and I exercised, but I hiked, and it's just a great experience. So get out there and explore the world. And as Albert Einstein said, the only source of true knowledge is actually experience. So get out there and experience the world. And if you really want a true experience, what I recommend is to run 100 miles at least once in your lifetime. And you guys should know this is Forrest Gump, right? And so it's actually one of my favorite movies, Forrest Gump, because he's a very, although the movie doesn't play it off like that, he's a very intelligent man. He has a lot of good quotes, a good outlook on life. And as he said, right, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. But if you run 100 miles, and I think unless you have some knee problems, etc., I believe that everyone in this room can run 100 miles. And if you run 100 miles, it's basically like living a lifetime in a day or two, or however long it takes you to do that event. You have so many ups and downs and challenges along the way, and struggles. But at the end, the sense of accomplishment that you get, it sort of makes you feel, I don't know, like you can do anything. So you may laugh at me now, but if sometime in the future you do that, get back to me and let me know how it goes, because I bet you it'll make you a better person. And not saying that anyone here is a bad person, but it'll even make you an even better person. So I suggest that everyone needs to keep challenging yourself to think better, do better, and be better, right? Because we can always be better no matter who you are. And you're all great as it is, but keep challenging yourself to do better things. And then to wrap things up, I have probably my most important slide of the lecture that I would like to show you guys for life lessons, and that is go Packers. Yeah. So with that, any questions? And yeah, thank you for your attention and listening. And hopefully, at least you got something from the lecture. So, yeah. Just grab my flash drive here.
You're good. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I'm sure Dr. Peltonen would be more than willing to answer any questions if you have any. We do have some refreshments right outside if you would like to join us for some, a couple of appetizers. And we hope that you'll come tomorrow to Do's and Donuts in the JCB lobby at 10 a.m. Thank you.